Good day, good afternoon. Not legal advice. Like, subscribe, share, comment. If you have any issues you want discussed, please let me know. Tonight's episode, a little different. It's called Embezzlement and the Housewives of Beverly Hills. Before we get started on that, I kind of wanted to do the requested joke of the night. What kind of concert costs 45 cents? Answer, of course, a 50-cent concert featuring Nickelback. Okay, so in a stream with JR, also known as Brian, a couple of days ago, one of the stories that we discussed involved a Tom Girardi, an attorney. And Tom Girardi, at least at one point in time, was a very skilled attorney who eventually was disbarred and is now facing trial for various counts of wire fraud. He's now 83 years old. He claimed in an attempt to block the trial, the criminal trial, from going forward, he claimed to have Alzheimer's disease and objected to his trial. A local doctor confirmed that diagnosis and recommended that the trial not go forward. The court appointed another doctor to make that analysis, and that doctor concluded that Mr. Girardi was competent to stand trial. So the trial is in the news currently and is set to go forward at some future point in time. The situation reminded me of a New York case that happened a while ago, many years ago probably, where a alleged mafia participant claimed to be insane, and he wanted his trial not to go forward. And the way he demonstrated that insanity, amongst other ways, was he would talk to himself, and on top of that, he would always come to the court wearing his pajamas. So it was very entertaining, to be honest, but the court did find him to be competent and made his trial go forward, and he ended up being convicted. So where does the Housewives of Beverly Hills come into this? Well, Mr. Girardi and his now estranged wife were on The Real Housewives, and their pending divorce is held up pending the outcome of the legal proceedings. And my understanding is that despite possible benefits that his future ex-wife may have received from inappropriate places through her husband, that she is not being pursued currently in this matter. His brother, who also was working at the firm, is now in charge and has been in charge of running the firm. And I don't believe he has been charged also. Now, Mr. Girardi at one point in time was a fine attorney. He was a trial attorney. And often the best trial attorneys yield arguments with charm and very convincing manner. His initial specialty was medical malpractice, where he would successfully represent plaintiffs who had suffered injuries and other catastrophic results from doctors and institutions. He represented the plaintiffs in that matter and was very successful at that. He went on to handle other huge cases, including the case of the toxic water case in Hinckley, California, as portrayed in the movie Erin Brockovich. A member of the MMTLP community who goes by the handle as Junk Savvy was familiar with that case, as her family lived in the Barstow area at the time and was familiar with the circumstances of that case. The defendant in that matter, who has been involved in other issues in California relating to fire, was PG&E. But in that case, Mr. Girardi helped plaintiffs who had suffered injuries recover large sums of money. I too am familiar with Mr. Girardi. I attended some lectures that he brilliantly gave as to various aspects of litigation. And in a while, I'll tell you about another class that he ironically also taught. So, the bottom line is, so apparently to support payroll and personal expenses, and those personal expenses were reflected in his lavish lifestyle as represented in the Housewives of Beverly Hills series. Both Girardi and his top CFO face criminal charges and jail time up to 20 years for alleged embezzlement and are being charged with wire fraud. So Girardi legitimately helped many victims. However, as it turns out, he's accused of embezzling client settlement funds. It arose after a plane crash in Illinois. Apparently, some settlement was reached in that matter and funds were wired to Mr. Girardi. Those funds were to be released to the victims and their families. Instead of doing that, they were never turned over. And eventually, his co-counsel, who was counsel, I believe, in Chicago, made an issue of it, and eventually it arose to being a criminal matter. As a result, after various other complaints, he was disbarred. And he's alleged to have embezzled approximately $15 million. Could be more, could be less. Slightly less, more likely more. And there would be interest on that. And that was from victims, the victims who could not stand up and represent themselves. So for somebody who at one point in time helped people, this is quite a far cry from that. And again, it seemed primarily to satisfy a lavish lifestyle. So that's bad enough. But let's talk about the other half of the story. Despite the irony that Mr. Girardi at one point in time also taught legal ethics at law school, this is another example of inept and corrupt regulatory supervision. Per multiple investigations triggered after this particular incident, since it's being public, a lot was learned. It turned out there were literally hundreds of complaints against Girardi for various types of misconduct. Almost all of these were handled by bar members, the regulatory body, in a way to shield or assist Mr. Girardi and to protect his interest and the personal interest of those at the bar who may have personally benefited from interactions with Mr. Girardi. One former bar employee himself received gifts from Girardi exceeding $1 million. Many employees, other employees of the bar, also received gifts but just didn't report them to the bar. Relatives of bar employees were employed by Mr. Girardi and his firm. Staff at the bar wrongfully injected themselves to shield Girardi in matters they shouldn't have been involved with. Executive directors, interim executive directors, and general counsel were improperly influenced to assist Girardi. So all this occurred over a decade or more where he was protected, he being Mr. Girardi, apparently by undertaking all kinds of at least unethical, if not worse, acts. So, although it took 204 formal complaints, I'm laughing because it's so absurd, 204 formal complaints to get Girardi to stop practicing, it was also suggested there were other hundreds of complaints that were not lodged because the bar dissuade people from filing them. So it's just a horrendous situation. So a guy who apparently did good then went south, very south, and undertook extremely unethical actions and robbed, really, if the allegations are true, robbed people. And it was done at least the blind neglect, if not assistance, of a regulatory body, a corrupt and obviously incompetent regulatory body. Just another example of the regulators not intervening to protect the public and consumers. Does that sound like any regulatory body that you've ever dealt with? Let me know. Have a good night.